number one in terms of experience consulting, until we sold the business in the latter part of December last year. So it's a great pleasure for me to actually re-enter the world of customer experience today, as my restrictions from that particular deal have ended, and I'm really looking forward to re-engaging in the subject I love. I'm actually joined today by three esteemed colleagues, and I'm going to just ask them to take a moment just to introduce themselves before we actually get into the event itself. And also to point you out that there is a website for this particular event which you can go to, cxday.org. You can see it down in the bottom right-hand corner. Please do feel free to go and visit and see some of the other fantastic events that are happening as part of this CXPA day. So, first of all, I've just asked Rachel, could you say hello to our gathered audience of quite a few people around in the European market, and just explain a little bit about yourself.
Great. Thank you, Alan. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm really pleased to be part of this panel today. So, as Alan said, I'm Rachel Buckley, formerly Vice President of Global Customer Experience at Thomson Reuters, where I was responsible for leading the global customer Voice of Customer program, customer loyalty and retention programs, and also working very closely with the sales and finance teams to look at revenue opportunities and accounts at risk. So really holistically, the whole approach towards setting up the new sort of discipline around customer experience.
Thank you, Rachel. Two words two areas. One, discipline, because I think CX finally is emerging from the darkness and being seen as a discipline by organisations today, which is great, far more professional. And secondly, you use words that people don't often use, which is things like finance and sales in the same sentence as customer experience. Yeah. So that very much fits with this theme of 360-degree experience management. Thank you. Harriet, hello.
Hello. I'm standing in for, I'm based in Melbourne in Australia, but I'm from London. I run the experience design department at Medibank, which is a private health insurance organisation. My department has been involved in setting up an experience design practice which spans CX, UX, visual design, graphic design, with a view of using human-centered design to solve problems of customer experience. And like Rachel, we have very strong revenue targets around lapse, retention, and one of my passions is about sort of taking CX from what we used to call fluffy to meaty. I have a great desire to see CX as a very strong, tangible business environment. So my big interest is in how do you start to redesign the metrics themselves, and how do you start to bring the design of customer experience into the heart of business strategy.
Brilliant. Thank you. Looking forward to hear about that. And last but not least, Mike.
Thanks, Alan, and hello, everyone. Happy Client Experience Day. My name is Mike Hakkens, and I work for the international part of Fidelity Investments. So everything outside of the US, we're an asset management firm, and my role since around 2011 has been to really lay the foundation for a more sort of disciplined way of looking at client experience. Coming out of the financial crisis, that was really a priority for us, and we've got a very strong heritage and a history of client service and being client-centric, but nonetheless, we looked at bringing in a net promoter, for example, and also focusing on continuous improvement more on client experience, as well as laying the foundation in terms of executive engagement, etc. So very capability focused. Now we are looking more at taking an end-to-end approach and being very project based. And so I'll be leading a center of excellence that will coordinate and get involved with some of the big strategic initiatives and imperatives that we as a business are going to focus on for the next 3 to 5 years. I've been with the CXPA for the last 3 years, and I'd like to say thank you to everyone for sharing so much and helping us on this journey. And I think that's the real power of the CXPA, hence my humble contribution here today.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, for those of you who are listening in or watching on the webinar, We have about 26 minutes left on this particular webinar. If you want to ask questions, then you can use the bar on the right-hand side, and I will see those. And if I get the chance, I'll put them into the discussion. If not, we can certainly follow up post the webinar itself. So I'm going to dive straight in with the first question around 360-degree CX management, and I'm going to go to Harriet to begin with. So this question was about how have you identified the end-to-end customer experience journey as succinctly as you can?
That's a big challenge. So succinctly, I think we need to start identifying customer journeys based on customers. So in the early love-in with customer journey mapping, I think we've been very inclined to map customer journeys from a business perspective. We've just completed mapping of our 5 key customer journeys that we have. Obviously, there are many more. But for me, it's around starting with a customer-driven. We use a technique called service blueprinting to start with a customer's view and a customer story of the journey. And then we map back through that, through the business, and align those things. So for us, it's very much a customer story, a customer identification of how they see the segments of the journey, and then a gap mapping and gap analysis backwards to understand where our processes don't meet a customer's journey expectations.
Thank you. You used the phrase stories and journey there, and I really like the emergence of stories, because story says emotion. Journey map can sound like a process, so if you bring those two together.
And I think that's very good, the early point, and we saw a lot in early journey maps. We saw a lot of effectively just adding coloured pictures to process maps. And for us now, it's about much more about the empathetic, story-driven, human-centred side of the story, and then identifying where those don't align with processes. So yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah. Thoughts, Rachel, Mike, on that?
Yeah, I mean, some of my thoughts is, you really have to basically start off with with your boilerplate map, where you're looking at being able to sort of provide identification around the customer's purchase decisions, the after-sales experience, and also what choices they're making around continuing to do business with you or cancelling or leaving. It's all about layering on top of that basic boilerplate. So to Harriet's point, is starting to understand, then layering on, out of all of that whole map and the experience that the customers are going to have, whether they're designed or not, they're going to have an experience of doing business with you. And it's really then using that map to be able to then layer on like the moments of truth and layer on the pain points from a customer's perspective. What are you hearing about that's causing them pain? And then also more generically, where are the performance points? Where are the points on that journey of the customers are going through with you as an organisation that you can delight them, or they just see you as a bit of a nuisance? So I think the whole customer journey map, it's a journey in itself to create, but it's about becoming more and more sophisticated, adding layers to that basic map of what the customer's perceiving as you.
I've always taken that view. Yes, go on, Harriet.
Yeah, I just want to jump to that because I think you've got a point. I think there's a point at which we fall in love with the creation of the map itself and the tool and the map. And for me, the most powerful part of a journey map is actually a reality check about the relationship that a customer has with your business, and the openness to be able to allow that to evolve in a way that is actually quite different from what you expect. So where you actually prove to be quite irrelevant, or you prove to be, as you said, Rachel, something that you thought was deeply important is actually fundamentally not important. And also moving out of that very incremental, I started to move away from touch points even, because I think touch points focus businesses into small things and chunks that actually don't deliver experiences. They deliver small experiences and chunks. And if we want to create that seamless story, we need to be thinking in bigger pieces. That's just emerging.
So I think in the background to that, you were saying, to summarise, creating the baseline map's really important. But I always describe it as a bit like a map, it's a bit like a treasure map without X marks the spot, or there may be several X's. And therefore you need to find where on that end-to-end journey, because not all touch points or indeed interactions are equal, where are the really important ones. So that's a brilliant segue, Mike, into the next question, which is, so what are the good sources of CX insights?
Right, so there are many. I would say that a good source also depends on the actual purpose of or the need of actually getting the insights. So if you just giving a practical example here, so for a more operationally focused improvement project where you want to iron out any niggles for clients, it might be sufficient to speak to the people on the front line at the call center, or combining that with some internal operational data, and that might give you the insights you need. Whereas I think if we are looking at developing the overall client life cycle, for example, what we just talked about, or indeed a journey, it will also be very important to in some way, shape or form, talk to customers directly and really, like we just said, obsess with their needs before we actually start thinking about what the solution might look like. And I think that's something that you cannot do through operational data or just talking to the front line, but there you also need real sort of ethnographic skills and people who really understand behavioral research. And the source there indeed would be the actual client. But I know that Rachel also has got a lot of experience in this area, so maybe you want to add to that or layer on to that?
Layer on to that? Words? Yeah, I mean, my background is the B2B space, and I think, again, a big learning point for me is about measuring who matters. So you can segment your customers in many different ways, but one of the ways to segment them is also how you want to listen to them and how you need to listen to them. Because with end users, you can be listening the email or the online help desks, chat, social media can be great ways of understanding what your end users and your power users are saying of products and things. But when you start getting down to people who are buying and making the business decisions about buying and continuing to do business with you, I think these guys have much higher expectations from their personal interactions with you. So to be able to sit down and do some more of the ethnographic, more of the one-to-one sort of relationship survey stuff is hugely valuable, and you get immense amount of information for it. Very different feedback from perhaps other types of surveys and things. So I think the personal touch is really important in a B2B environment, for example. And I think also speaking to people who their day job is dealing with the customers. So don't just, it's not just listening to customers, but it's also listening to people within your organisation who have that interactions with customers as well.
Thank you, Rachel. Harriet, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I think it's also about organisational change, because I think in the space of creating voice of customers, you can have as much data as you like, but if you don't have a company with a listening mindset or an empathetic mindset, then it doesn't matter how much conversation you've got coming in, the messages won't be heard. And so a lot of that transformation has to go in with internal culture and capability too, to be able to receive the insights from a business, because you need people who are able to understand what makes something resonant or dissonant. You need to have a culture of people who are prepared to listen and who are prepared to take the somewhat confrontational insights sometimes that come from listening intently as well.
Yeah, sometimes holding the mirror up to the organisation is a dangerous thing to do. They don't really want to see what it looks like sometimes. It can be quite ugly, but there you go. Harriet, while you're there, I have a question from Katie, just picking up on something that you said earlier, where you said you said you were moving away from focusing entirely on touch points because perhaps it's too granular.
Yes.
So she's saying, how are you framing the customer journey without overemphasizing touch points?
We use NPS quite a lot, and what we did was we went out and did some quite big quant work with our NPS, and we quantified and sized the key. We went across our journeys. We then quantified and sized all the drivers across our journeys with a big quant piece of work, and then we went back and reorganized our NPS around those. So what that gave us was a series of episodes. So we were able to look at the drivers, and we had over 300 drivers that came back. And we were able to identify per journey and per stage of journey what were the key drivers. So we were able to say, for example, getting clear access to information was a key driver that we saw appearing in every single journey in a different stage, but at every single journey. So what we started to do was align our journeys much more around drivers of satisfaction. And what that's allowed us to do is to create much more flexible maps, because as we improve against key drivers, we see our maps morph. So, for example, if we improve the information we give, we should see that driver diminish in importance, and we should see other drivers bubble up. So we have our NPS, and then we have some tracking that we do quarterly which then tracks and measures against those drivers. So we've taken a sort of blend of both qual and quant to our episodes, but we found that touch points were just not big enough or detailed enough to give us a real understanding of the experience that was being had and how that was reflecting across the journey. We needed to be able to say, if information is really important to us, how does that reflect in the beginning of the journey? How does it reflect at the claims part of the journey? How does it reflect, which actually changed the way the organisation started to tackle problems.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, it does, absolutely. Mike, are you looking, in your journeys, are you looking at stages rather than touch points these days?
Well, we do. When we put together the high-level life cycle for the private individual and for the financial advisor, we really looked at the way in which the customer sees their relationship with us, rather than trying to, aggregate process steps or things that we see internally. And I've got an example here where customers talking about researching their options, for example, on one side of the map, and that's the type of way in which we like to talk about the customer journey, rather than the touch point. And I think something that's very important in that regard also is to define what really manifests a typical Fidelity experience that's sort of rooted in client needs. And so some of the things we did is we came up with these different client experience principles. Yeah, so value, expertise, choice, and that's how we like to talk about the client experience more. And then we like teams and that either interact with clients or who, let's say, look to redefine or redesign a process or a touch point in that instance. Really engage with those elements. That answer your question, Al?
It does, thank you. So just a reminder for those who are on the webinar, if you do have any questions, then feel free to type them into the sidebar and I'll pick those up. In the meantime, Rachel, from a Thomson Reuters point of view, you've got a lot of customers out there. How are you viewing journey maps from a customer segment point of view, from a life stage point of view?
When I was at Thomson Reuters, just to putting the framework of formerly Thomson Reuters, one of the main areas that we were focusing on was like the moments of truth. Because when you look at the customer journey, the reason you're looking at it is to make it actionable. You can look at it and it can be a heck of a lot of noise, and you're spending a long time, a lot of resources building up the whole sort of journey map, and you've really got to remember what the objectives are and what you want to make actionable out of it. So I think you're really looking for points, and we were really looking for points around what were the aha moments around whichever way you do it. What are the aha moments? What are those moments of truth where you can truly do something different and memorable for the customer? Layering on and mapping also, like I said before, about the pain points, because you can action those in a different way with different members of people and make it become real for them. And the other thing around the opportunities is making each part of the organisation, again, the actionable side of it, making each part of the organisation sort of gel and feel a relationship with that journey map, so they know where they fit in, whether they're sort of several levels down the food chain from actually interfacing with the customer. So it's really about, to me, I was very passionate about making it actionable and concentrating on the things that we could do something about that would make a difference.
Okay. Just before we move on to the next big subject for this, and I'm going to combine three of the questions that were on the original list to talk really about how you engage an organisation. But we just had a question in from Susan, who says she'd love to hear some advice for learning customer needs with low or no research budget. So if you haven't got money to go out there finding bespoke material, how do you know what your customers are thinking, and how do you use that to influence the mapping and your actions? Who wants to take that? Harriet looks like she's ready.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of mystique around budget for research. And I think a customer experience mature organisation is one that looks at what it knows and uses that differently. And we've just put together for one of our departments a journey map, which is at no cost. Now, it's not an ideal journey map, But we went through whatever data we could find in the organisation for them, and we applied some skills to putting that together into a story that could be told. And that story has shifted things. That's generated now a big project, which is fully funded. And I think there is a strong need sometimes to do something, anything, and create something tangible, because often just by creating a set of pictures, creating a set of stories, creating a set of principles, putting data together in a format that can be understood is enough to start to shift things in the right order. It's very easy to say, well, we haven't got money, so we can't do it. But the fact is you're surrounded by social media streams, by process maps, data, complaints, feedback. Every organisation has information about its customers. And the practice of pulling that together in the first place can be enough to shift the thinking, I think.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree with that. There's usually rarely a shortage. It's understanding how that's going to feed into what you want and be a useful business asset for you. But that's a very good answer. Thank you. Katie says thank you, by the way, for the previous answer. I would go on to Rachel and Mike on that, but I want to push on with this next subject because I think it's quite important. And we're really combining here what are some ways to manage customer experiences holistically? How would you approach a department that doesn't think CX inputs are involved in their work, and how do you pull CX together, which for me bundles up into, it's kind of a cultural question. So how do you recommend to people listening in that they're able to engage people across the organisation? Rachel, I'm probably going to turn to you first. You were talking about, for example, finance or legal or operations, or people who are 2 or 3 degrees of separation away from the front line. But if they're not engaged, then it's to the detriment of the overall activity. So thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, just to start from a sort of like keeping yourself grounded, there's a quote that I often refer to from, I don't know whether this European audience is aware, but Calvin Coolidge, 30th President of the United States, just in case we do have some US folks on the line, said, we can't do everything at once, but we can do something at once. And I think that's really important. So a starting point in Thomson Reuters for me, when I was sort of effectively given the remit to build a customer experience function and discipline with a blank piece of paper, was get your model right. So we focused on the voice of the customer program, the intelligence, the employee engagement, the customer loyalty piece. And by even listing those 4 areas there's people who are already doing this. It's not as if we're doing something from scratch. So I think a big thing around getting people on board and having them build that understanding of where they fit in, I think it's really making it come to life for them, and pick some low-hanging fruit. Work with them to understand how some small or significant changes can impact the customer. So start somewhere. Don't try and do everything at once. Start somewhere, get some low-hanging fruit, pick working with your highest performing people. And back to your point, and then one I made earlier about finance, they can be seen as customer experience heroes within the organisation. I mean, how cool is it if your finance people can present to the board around the activities that the organisation are undertaking to move 1% of passive customers to being promoters, and then being able to share what the financial impact of that might be. So that really is driving and can help drive some of the investment decisions that organisation makes, and it's the finance guys that can help articulate that message.
So I heard there early success, small changes, getting to action. Don't kind of wait for the big fix. Mike, how does that play in Fidelity?
Well, the action bias is definitely something that plays very well to our culture, Alan and the others. I think what there has to be some sort of a strategic imperative in a big organization like Fidelity as well. There are often many competing initiatives and strategic priorities, and so for us it was important to lift client experience back onto that level as well, even though people felt that client focus and client service is something that would come natural to us as a firm. But I think additionally it's important to think about it the way in which we work with the internal departments as if we were working with customers. And then there are rational and there are some extent physical and emotional elements to engaging people with client experience. Yeah, I hope that doesn't sound too esoteric. I'll give a couple of examples. When we tried to launch NPS, there were a certain number of stakeholders who naturally bought into this, and then there were 2 or 3 that weren't quite there. And I learned more about these individuals to really try and find examples and case studies that would appeal to them personally. People who were working around with Apple devices, or were attending meeting with Apple devices, I would try and appeal to them with Apple stories. Someone who I knew had a Harley Davidson bike. I brought out the community example and the NPS examples from Harley Davidson. It's those things that really make a difference for me as well.
Smart thinking, I would suggest, Mike. But yeah, appeal to people's emotional side. Even finance people do. Sorry, it's only on the line.
Yes,
have emotional sides.
On the financial side, I actually, when our vice chairman, who's also our chairman, who's also the chairman of the organization in the US, came and visited us, and we recorded a short video about client experience and why it's important. We actually specifically asked her to talk about finance and how finance has a role to play in client experience, and by managing our finances efficiently, more resources could be made available to really focus on clients and client experience. Was the story we used, or the element of the video that really brought the finance people into the frame as well. So there you go.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm gonna leave the last word on this to Harriet. We've got about 3 minutes until we're going to wrap this up. So Harriet.
Yeah, I think for me that there's several things. One is for us around NPS was that we framed NPS not as a customer measure but as a business measure. So our NPS is a sign of customers at risk. So if our customer base, if we've got a high number of people sitting in passive and detractor, basically that is customers at risk. And so that was a very simple, clear business message that was easy to sell. The other thing that we've been using is because we're an experience design department, we've been talking a lot around what often happens is the solution to the problem gets solved before the question gets framed. And so what we've done a lot of is doing collaborative working across our business with stakeholders to actually define questions up front. And that's been really enlightening for us, because often you start off with what you think is an aligned question and obviously it's not. So we've been starting very, very far up the chain and saying, what's the question we're trying to solve? Then we've actually been aligning the people who solve our metrics and problems, a different group, design-led but different group, to say, well, what are the numbers telling us? What is the context of the problem? Then we've been coming up with our hypotheses collaboratively, and then we've been moving to design. And starting that and pushing the design to the actual part where you have a defined question has helped bring people on board, because it's changed it from an experience thing that sits off separately from the business to being something that is absolutely core to the solution of our biggest problems. And I think the other thing is what both Rachel and Mike have said is around actually getting things actions. It doesn't matter if it's not perfect, let's just get it out there. Let's show that we can make progress, even if it's only 0.5% or 0.25 of a particular budget bottom line. If we can show that there is an impact, that will help us overall. And we've also built a very strong framework where we've anchored a lot of the key business metrics into a CX framework, which again has been sort of really framing the story. Instead of lamenting the fact that people don't understand customer experience, we've said, how does customer experience speak the language of business, and what do we have to learn to be taken seriously in that environment? So again, storytelling, I suppose.
Yeah, I thank you. A very comprehensive set of answers. For me, in my experience, relevance is really, really important for people in an organisation. And it's not that people don't go out of their way to ignore this. It's just that they don't see the connectivity between what they do when they send something out from credit control that has some horrible language in it to a very a long-term customer. The impact of that is several times removed. And I always remember somebody saying the further you are, the number of places you are away from the front line, the easier it is to say no. And of course it is, because you don't actually see the implications of just saying no. You totter off into the distance. So true. Coming to the end of it now, I have to say. So we've got I think 360 degrees of answers from people. Hopefully those of you that have been on this webinar have enjoyed it, and I'd like to thank Rachel, Mike and Harriet for their time and contribution. and I'm sure we will pick up. There's a couple of questions but I wasn't able to pick up during the course of this. We will pick those up offline, please rest assured. So it just remains for me to say, once again, look at the website, cxday.org. The day is continuing. It's been a pleasure hosting you today. And happy CX Day to everyone.